this is the piece of history of Czechoslovakia. In 1938, Hitler demanded the Sudeten of Czechoslovakia. It's a big chunk of a big part of the Czech Republic of Czechoslovakia, where German people lived and they had total autonomy. They could speak German without learning the Czech language. They had their own schools, churches, everything. They had a good life.
So this was the Sudetenland.
Pardon?
Sudetenland. The Sudetenland. Sudetenland?
Sudetenland.
Yeah.
Sudetengebiet, they called it. And 1938, Hitler went to the League of Nations and demanded it for himself. He didn't demand it from the Czech Republic, from the Czech authorities, only from the League of Nations, because there was a German population and it's coming to him. And Neville Chamberlain, who was the Prime Minister of Germany, of England, and Daladier, who was Prime Minister of France, and Mussolini
of Italy,
who went to Munich, and they were talking about this. They were speaking in the name of the League of Nations, these British and the French. And they didn't even call in the Czech delegation. The Czech people, representatives of the Czech government, were sitting outside, according to my Holocaust book, crying, because they were negotiating away a piece of land which was strictly Czech. It contained beautiful cities, cities like Carlsbad, Karlovy Vary, which is still there, and it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And kings and maharajas and came to walk up and down the promenade, drinking the Carlsbad water, which was a natural water coming from the spa. And it was, anyway, they signed it away. They signed the Sudeten area away to Germany. And when these delegates, the British Prime Minister came back to London on an aeroplane, and he was descending the steps, and downstairs they had people waiting. I remember it. This was 1938, and I was then 11 years old. And there was a picture in the newspaper, daily newspapers that my parents read, and it showed this picture. Chamberlain talks to the people who came to wait for him, and he says, "Today we gained peace in our time."
Peace in our times.
I remember that?
I remember this statement.
Sure, this statement was made, and it's very appropriate because half a year later, around March of 1939, Hitler marched into the Czech part of Czechoslovakia, occupied it. There was not a single bullet by the Czech army fired at Hitler. They occupied it, and Czechoslovakia fell apart, where Czechia and Moravia were occupied by Hitler. Slovakia declared its independence under a Slovakian Catholic fascistic priest, and Karpaty Rus was left not knowing we were living there. It's a small, very poor, very primitive place, and we didn't know what's going to happen to us. And what happened, now I come back to the stamps. What happened was that Hust, my town, had a population of 20,000 people, 8,000 of whom were Jews.
Wow.
And the rest were Ukrainian, Hungarian, German, Schwab, okay? And what happened in the short 2-3 weeks, that the Ukrainians people called together a Soim. I don't know whether it's like something like a congress or something, and they printed and called it Ukrainian something. They wanted it to be an independent little country like Slovakia, but we were much smaller. And what they did is they printed stamps.
Wow.
And I'm sure if there are stamps around, they are very few and probably valuable, because it was a one-time, very short period of time, maybe a week or less, that they declared themselves a nation with their own stamps. Okay, so that's the story.
That's amazing. Sure. And it only lasted for 1 week? Possibly.
But something else happened. This was March 1939, and a week or two later, the Hungarians occupied our area, Carpathia Rus, that same thing which they wanted to call Ukrainian part. They occupied it. It became Hungary now. And Hungary occupied the other areas, part of Romania, part of Yugoslavia, part of southern Slovakia. And Hungary became big, and they were anyway partners to Hitler. They had a pact with Hitler. And we, the Jews of Hungary, remained living in our homes. This is a historical anomaly. Whereas Hitler, I remember I asked you about Lithuania and Latvia. Hitler invaded Poland in September.
So the 1st of September,
same year. And then he went up to the northern Baltic countries, and then he swept through Europe, from northeast Europe to south and western Europe, Belgium, Holland, France. And we were still, 5 years later, we were still living in Hungary, where the Jews were liquidated by Hitler as he went along. By 1943, there were Europe was Judenrein. Yeah. It means clean of Jews.
No
Germans,
Jews,
except for Hungary, where we were still living in our homes. And Hitler was going absolutely berserk about it, because the leader of Hungary, Horthy, Nicholas Horthy, was sworn to him. They had a pact together.
They were allies.
And they were allies, and on the other side were the allied people. These were the so-called Axis nations. Opposite were the allied, the British, the America, Britain, France. And here is a friend who betrays Hitler because he doesn't allow the Jews to be taken away. And then it happened. 5 years later, 1945, March 19th, 3 weeks before Pesach, the Nazis walked into Hungary, and that was our end.
And you know what's unbelievable? That they knew they were losing the war.
I'm sorry?
The Germans needed all the resources because they were losing the war, but they put all the resources to destroy the Yidden.
Well, that was his goal. That was his ideology.
But he would lose his own country but spend all the resources to kill the
That's
Yidden.
the way he managed to fire up
The people.
to follow him.
That's amazing, unbelievable. Phew. Thank you so much.
So did you ever hear about these stamps?
I did hear about it. I still, I must try. It's very rare, and I must try get a copy. I don't know if there are copies available, but
You know, where do you find such things? I'm sure on the internet they would
there
know
could
about
be.
it.
No, there are collectors that do collect it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay.